In this video, I'm going to show you how layers work inside of Photoshop. Now, if you're following along with layers.psd, you can see how this works on your own, or you can just watch and I will explain it to you. So you've already seen the layers panel before, and layers are basically a way for you to organize your graphics inside of Photoshop and do all kinds of amazing things. Now, we'll get into detail all the different things you can do with it later on, but just keep in mind that you can use this for selecting, for editing, for graphics, effects, layer styles, masking, and all kinds of other things. So let's just take a quick look at the layers here. I will explain how they work, and then in future videos we'll go more in depth into the layer panel and everything here. But we have three layers created: the pen layer, the paper layer, and the wood layer. Now, as you've seen before, whenever we open up a new image, it is given the name background, the layer is locked down, and you can't edit it. So I've already turned this into a normal layer, and we will be able to edit these around, but I just want to show you how layers work. Now, the basic concept of layers is that they stack on top of one another. So if you imagine that we have the wood here, and on top of that wood is the paper, and on top of that paper is the pen. That's the same way that the layers stack and the way that you see them inside of Photoshop. So whatever is on top of the layers panel is going to be the topmost thing, and whatever is in the back or the bottom is going to be in the very back. So let's see how this works. I'm going to hide these layers here, and here we have the wood layer, and that's just our standard image. I can turn off the visibility and you can see transparency. Of course, if I were to cut away any of this wood on this layer, we would also see that transparency. Above that layer is the paper layer, and if I turn off the wood layer and I turn on the paper layer, you will see it's just a paper image with a transparent background. And it sits above the wood layer, so it's going to sit on top. So if I turn the wood on and then I turn on the paper layer, you will see the paper layer sits on top of the wood, just like in our illustration here. If I were to take the wood and drag it above the paper layer, it is now on top of the paper layer, and because it fills out the whole image here, we can't see the paper behind it. If I grab this image and I move it over until we can see the paper layer, you can see what's happening here. That paper layer is underneath the wood because it's actually underneath the layers in the layers panel here. If we move the wood back underneath the paper, you can see that now the paper layer is on top, and it's on top of that wood. So that is the basics of how layers work. Same thing with the pen. Because the pen is on top of the paper, we see the pen when we have it highlighted here above everything else. If we move the pen behind the paper, we see it sticking out there, but it's behind the paper, so we don't see it. It's in between these two layers. So that's the basics of how layers work, and it's really important to understand that as soon as possible, because we're going to look more into layers, and I want you to have a firm grasp of that's how they work, because we use a lot of layers inside of Photoshop. Sometimes they can get really big, into the hundreds of layers on some projects. So you want to understand how they work, and then we'll talk about the different layer types that there are. So for instance, this is just a basic image layer, and you can see that this is an image, but it has a checkerboard pattern in its icon, so there's transparency. We can add a type layer, so when I add my type tool in, it adds that layer on top of the layers panel, and now it's a T for the type tool. So I'm just going to say hi everyone, and I'll grab my move tool. It will rename that layer to whatever I typed originally. So I typed hi everyone, so that's the name of that layer. And we can click and we can move this around. And then there's other types of layers, such as shape layers. So we can create a shape here. Maybe we do a rounded rectangle tool and we create that layer. And then now you can see it looks a little different. It's got this smart object right here. And then we can also have layer masks, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but we can actually create masks within our layers to show and hide things that we want to see. So whenever we see that, it's off to the side, it's a different looking layer, and we could also invert this layer here, and it's the inverse, so it's blacked out with the white of what we want to see here. and we can, move that around and adjust that. But I'll show you how to do masking in just a little bit. But these are all the different layers that you will see: smart object layers, image layers, shape layers, and type layers. But once you understand how they stack on top of one another, it will be a lot easier for you, because that is the basics of using layers inside of Photoshop, and it's very common. So go ahead and mess around with layers now and try to get the hang of them while you can.